Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll be getting started in just a couple minutes, but feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. We'll be starting soon. Hi, welcome. Welcome in. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're just giving folks time to get in and get settled, and you can start introducing yourselves in the chat. Let us know your name, your pronouns if you're comfortable sharing them, what library you're from, or what state you're joining us from. Hi, welcome. Good afternoon. Great, thanks for introducing yourselves in the chat. So good to see you all and have you all here.
Hey everyone, this is Mary Davis Fournier and I'm from ALA's Public Programs Office. Welcome to today's webinar, Centering Humans in Humanities Programming. It's great to see you all here in the virtual space. Today's webinar is presented by ALA's Public Programs Office with funding provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities as part of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Safety, or CARES Act Economic Stabilization Plan. We are so grateful for this support from NEH. Please note, any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this webinar do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or those of the American Library Association. Hopefully, many of you are familiar with the ALA Public Programs Office's Programming Librarian website. On Programming Librarian, you'll find lots of program ideas, stories, and resources, as well as an online learning library full of free professional development webinars like this one. Please check it out. So before we start, a couple of notes about your virtual classroom, or our virtual classroom, really. Only our presenters have microphone access in this Zoom, but you are welcome to type your questions or comments in the chat box. You've already been introducing yourselves via chat. We appreciate it. To send a chat message, in case you haven't done this yet, move your cursor to the bottom of the Zoom window and click Chat. Please note that the chat defaults to sending only to all panelists. So to make sure everyone can see your message, be sure to select all panelists and attendees. It's in that drop-down box next to the To field in chat. If you have any technical issues at all, please use the Q&A window to communicate with the ALA staff. To send a message through Q&A, move your cursor to the bottom of the Zoom window and click on Q&A. Please don't put technical questions in the chat window, as they could just get missed there. Chat speeds by pretty quickly sometimes. Okay, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. Moderating today's discussion is BB Brown, who is a program coordinator on our ALA Public Programs Office team. Here, BB assists projects like Resilient Communities, Libraries Respond to Climate Change, Community Connect, Digital Access at Home, and StarNet's STEAM Equity Project. They are also an artist and producer in Chicago whose work focuses on community care and mutual aid. Caitlyn Goodman is a curator in the Rare Book Department of the Free Library of Philadelphia. Caitlyn has worked in the Special Collections Division of the Free Library since 2013. There, she manages the collection level priorities of the rare book department and is especially invested in expanding access to collections through a combination of good descriptive practices and community-centered public programs. Mimosa Shah is an adult program coordinator at Skokie Public Library in Illinois. For the past 6 years, Mimosa has developed informal learning opportunities alongside and for adults in the Skokie community. Currently, she's pursuing a master's degree in library and information sciences through the University of Illinois School of Information Sciences. And Mimosa is deeply involved with the Museum Computer Network, a learning organization dedicated to digital transformation of museums and the GLAM sector more widely. And Margaret Woodruff is the director of the Charlotte Library in Vermont. She has been library director there for the past 9 years, and prior to that, she served as the library's youth services librarian and program coordinator at the Peaberry Access Museum in Salem, Massachusetts. The small size of Margaret's library and community means programming is a highly collaborative and interactive endeavor. And with that, I'm so pleased to turn things over to Bibi. Take it away, Bibi.
Hi, good morning, or actually good afternoon, everyone. Like Mary said, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction. My name is Bibi Brown, and I'm very excited to moderate our conversation today. Before we do so, I'd like to give a land acknowledgement, and thank you so much to Mimosa Shah for bringing us the text that we're going to use for this statement that was used in part by the Art Library Society of North America at a recent conference that they did this year. So we really uplift the work that the Art Libraries Society of North America is doing, and thank you to Mimosa for giving us this, providing us this language. And so I currently reside in Chicago, as well as a few of our panelist members today. We reside in Chicago, known as the ancestral lands of the Council of Three Fires, which include the Ottawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi tribes, as well as members of the Kickapoo and Miami tribes. Members of these tribes are still alive and thriving both nearby here and in the Great Plains states after being forcibly removed from these lands. Chicago and its suburbs are also home to the third largest urban Native population, in which more than 100 different affiliations are represented. Instead of creating one statement, we urge you to taking direct action to support Indigenous rights and culture. I encourage you to think about who has been forcibly removed from the land that you currently inhabit, how you benefit from the resources that were once cultivated by other Indigenous persons, and to recognize where the descendants of these groups now reside and thrive in spite of the violence committed upon them. It is true that all governments in North America committed atrocities against Indigenous, Native American, and First Nation peoples. Despite the theft of this land, it is still Indigenous land. It is true that Indigenous people are part of our present and future. We should remember that our history includes those who were kidnapped and brought here in the name of colonization and imperialism. We need to learn, protect, and honor the history and people of the places which we each individually live. We honor the lives of all who endured and continue to endure in the face of settler colonial oppression and white supremacy. We encourage you all to visit native-land.ca, and I'll drop this link in the chat shortly when I'm done speaking, to learn about what tribal lands you are currently residing on. Another moment that I would like to have with all of our panelists here to provide us with a description of what we all look like. This is a practice that we use for folks who are blind or low vision, who can be able to get a full picture of the panel, who is amazing, that we have today. So I'm going to begin by just describing myself, and then I will ask Mimosa then to follow me followed by Caitlyn, and then Margaret. We'll just give ourselves a quick description of what we look like today. So like I said, my name is BB. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and she, hers. Today I'm wearing a floral blue dress that goes well with my very blue mermaid-like long hair. And I have a headband that has sort of a checkered pattern on it. I am Black biracial, so I am African American and white. And I also have very long nails today, and I love to gesture. So that's what you'll be seeing a lot in this webinar today. Mimosa, could you go next?
Hi, good afternoon and good morning, wherever you may be. My name is Mimosa Shah, and my pronouns are she and her. And I am a South Asian woman with medium brown skin and black and blue shoulder length hair. And I am wearing a black kurta with a white print on it. And behind me is a background of an image that I took of a red flower. And behind that is a green blurred background. And I welcome you all. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlyn Goodman. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a white woman with pandemic length brown hair. I have a hot pink sweater on, a black and white beaded necklace, and behind me you'll see my living room wallpaper, which is large yellow flowers on a blue field. Look forward to speaking with you today.
Hi, I'm Margaret Woodruff, and I'm identify as she, her. I am a white woman of European descent with brown hair and hazel eyes. I'm wearing glasses and a black sweater, and my hair is up in a typical librarian bun. I am sitting in my office at the Charlotte Library where I work, and I'm glad to be here today. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you all so much for running through that and having us all enter the space together. Each of our librarians today are all coming from different communities and different spaces. Different communities and spaces, and I'd like to begin our conversation today by asking each of you to tell us about what humanities programming has looked like at your institutions and how you might have shifted your programming during the ongoing pandemic to meet the needs of your community. I'd like to start by asking Caitlyn to talk about an event that you had recently, and then move to Mimosa and end with Margaret.
Thank you, BB, and thank you for inviting me here to speak with these great library workers. As you could probably tell from my headshot, I work in special collections, which is a little bit different than doing adult programming. So I work for the Free Library of Philadelphia, which is the urban library system in Philadelphia. It's a massive system, over 50 locations, and I work in the rare book department there, which is somewhat atypical for rare book departments in libraries because it is so large in terms of the collections that we steward. And so we're a little bit more like a university library in some ways, and then also still a public library in some ways. So we have an interesting sort of hybrid life in the rare book department of the Free Library of Philadelphia. We're one of the largest rare book departments in American public libraries, and one of the core pieces of work that we do is we try to make space for stories to be told about our shared cultural heritage. And so we use the materials we have and the people that we work with to try to make space to allow those stories to be told. But of course, space is not filled equally on our shelves. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about a program that we have happening now virtually and hopefully someday in person. We are mostly a space for exhibitions. Our current exhibition is Medieval Life, European Manuscripts in Philadelphia Collections. It's the capstone to a big grant-funded project that worked to digitize and catalog and make available all of the European medieval and Renaissance manuscripts in the Philadelphia area. So it's about 400 manuscript book, which is a term for a handwritten book. and pieces of art from Philadelphia area libraries and museums. And so it was a great project on building access, and the Free Library decided to mark the end of it with an exhibition. And the exhibition takes as its curatorial theme the idea that the medieval period may feel very far away from our visitors today, but of course these themes that medieval creators were working within are similar to things that we deal with today. You know, how do we understand the natural world? What do we do as our daily work? What do we understand the law and justice to mean for us and those we care about? But even though medieval Europe was, in fact, quite a diverse and cosmopolitan place, with different places having different cultures and different periods having different emphases, the collections that we have in Philadelphia are almost all created by and for white Christians. And so that sort of challenges this assertion that these materials are universal, because a casual encounter with them may not make it feel very universal at all. So how do we try to broaden the engagement opportunity for people who might not be familiar with all of the professional medieval theorists working within the concept? You know, medievalists of color might be a group that visitors are unfamiliar with, and all of the great scholarship they're doing. And so how do we try to create a little bit more opportunity for engagement? And the solution we came up with was to have a second gallery that looks at these universal themes, natural world, law and justice, work, etc., through a broader swath of the special collections at the Free Library. And so it tries to get a little bit more breadth of collections and more breadth of creators, and allow for a couple different stories to maybe be told. But that was all when it was going to be physical. And now, as of tomorrow, no one is allowed in our library until January. And so how do we sort of pivot that and make space for these virtual encounters? And we've been fortunate to be able to develop a suite of virtual programs. The one I ran was focused exclusively on that second gallery, looking at materials from outside medieval Europe. And it was a way to talk a little bit about a lot of things and make some parallels with what we look at and create today and what people have looked at and created throughout history.
Great.
I will go ahead then. This is Mimosa speaking. And when you ask me what do we mean by humanities programming and centering humans in humanities programming, I think about how we as library workers are helping our communities with subjects, topics, and tools we know and trust. Collectively, society is experiencing immense loss and grief, whether it's the passing of a loved one, job loss, disruptions in normalcy, and so much more. Here's where I'd like to give credit to a colleague of mine, a user experience designer by the name of Andrea Montiel de Schumann, and her approach has deeply affected me and my thinking around how to develop and co-facilitate public learning and engagement in this time. We have so many communities who are trying their darndest to be engaged with each other, to feel joy, calm, and a sense of regularity. And here, as library workers, we're available and ready to help reawaken, ignite, inspire curiosity in what it means to be a human. And even though we are limited by the tools that we have, there's no better way than through a reconfiguring and representation of what even a collection means in this time. And even if we use the digital, it doesn't mean that our means of connecting are any less human. Our voice, our gaze may not be directed in a specific direction to a person, but they still are real. As one example of how we try to humanize the offerings that we share, I want to focus on something that we did at Skokie Public Library over this past summer. As part of our ongoing Civic Lab series, we decided to make our series into chapters. And this past summer, we converted an in-person pop-up event series and made it available via Zoom. And this series was called Pandemics, Provocations, and Protests. We used that in-person pop-up experience and incorporated it in such a way that two-way engagement was made tangible using co-authored documents, resource sheets, and a blend of discussion and reflection on the violent events and courageous protests that took place across the US this past summer. We took elements of how we engage with patrons in person and applied that to a collaborative model which questions and considers how we obtain, process, and share information, and in turn, what do we do to co-create and systematically engage with information streams around us now that we've been presented with this information. So it's another way of refashioning what could have been a chance encounter at a reference desk or somewhere in our library, but instead we had to remodel it. And yes, it was not as spontaneous, but it was certainly guided by these principles of engagement.
Okay, my turn. I guess I think that I'll pick up on that common thread of engagement. I think that's what we're all looking. I mean, I think that's one of the attractions of being in the library world is how to inspire that in curiosity and create that sense of engagement. The town I live and work in, Charlotte, is a very small town of 3,700 people in just south of Burlington on Lake Champlain. It's also quite spread out. So when we were dealing with the changes that came along in the spring, it was how can we connect people that normally, would get in their car and come to the library to enjoy a book discussion or a foreign policy discussion. And I feel like there were sort of two strands. One was to help continue to foster those connections. And I think the other one was to give people a place to explore some of the issues and ideas that were coming up over time. And I think for a while there, we all felt like we might have been in a little bit of a vacuum, and certainly in our town where there were fewer chances to connect with people. And so we ended up doing, again, like everybody, it was all online, but I think we created a menu of programs that were able to respond to some of the issues that people wanted to talk about or were concerned about. That's how we sort of played out through the spring and summer and fall, and it looks like that'll continue right on into the new year.
Yes, thank you all so much, Caitlyn, Mimosa, and Margaret, for your responses. It's really interesting and exciting to hear about three different approaches to humanities programming based off of your communities, the size of your libraries, and the interests and materials that you all have. And something that I think each of you touched on, in addition to the engagement, was also really the why humanities programming. Certainly right now with so much uncertainty to talk about what it means to be human right now in this moment could go on for hours, but I know sometimes that it can be a bit of a sell to do humanities programming. So I'd like to hear from each of you a remark on like why do libraries have humanities programming, and or why should they have programming? I would just love to hear from each of you. So why don't we go to Mimosa, if you could go first, and then Margaret, and then Caitlyn.
Right now there is a lot of happening simultaneously, and it is oftentimes difficult for us all to use that dreaded word pivot in the moment and try to respond effectively to where our communities may be. I think that with humanities programming, what it offers is a flexibility and an assurance that no matter the strife and oppression we may experience in any moment, we are all still connected by certain things that don't lapse in the midst of this dangerous time. And there is something to be said for how a library can provide that space, even if its building remains shuttered. That we are here to be resources, yes, but also familiar faces and voices. And even if those faces and voices are not necessarily available to you synchronously, whether it's a recording or even just a handout that someone lovingly prepared, there is a human behind all that that has persisted and made that possible.
Yes, I think I think the connection is such a key part of all of this. And I know at my library that has taken the form of some book discussions that center on events that have been happening this year. We had a racial justice book discussion in the summer as a way to sort of respond in this very homogenous community to some of the things that were happening across the country, and give us a chance to figure out how we can respond and react and take action. I think that books provide that understanding. Other projects that we have done have given people a chance to express themselves. So we've had a couple of art-based programs where we've offered supplies, materials, and the inkling of an idea to our community. And it's just been so amazing what has come back to us. And I think it's one of those things about working in a library is it isn't just a one-way street. Things go both ways, and I think that's what's really been highlighted all the more during this time is we've put, as you said, Mimosa, the love and care into preparing something. We get so much appreciation, and we get ideas and inspiration from the community as well. So that's been really great.
I think Mimosa and Margaret gave really wonderful answers to this question. I really like the idea of sort of working with and through flexibility. And I especially appreciate it because it seems that so frequently when we talk about, why the humanities, it tends to be a sort of instrumentalist argument as we do the humanities because of some other end, some sort of non-humanities end. And I think that might be sometimes justifying it from a point of weakness. We don't talk about different ways of thinking or different ways of being in order to be more agile capitalists. It's rather to be fuller and more empathic humans. And I think that especially now when so many people are experiencing so many different overlapping crises, return to a understanding of your own self-worth residing in some sort of point of humanness and human connection doesn't have to be justified in service to some other, instrumental end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, thank you all for your responses. It really makes you think about the idea of looking inward so that we can connect more fully to each other, and recognizing our own humanity and the humanity in others, and talking about what we all qualify as us engaging with our own humanity can be an interesting way to cross a lot of bridges, even as there is so much going on all at once. My next question is still about humans. Kind of going off of what you were saying earlier, Mimosa. We're talking about how can we center the humans in the humanities, and we've talked about different programs that we might offer. But there's also strategies to how the event is even presented that can more readily center humans based off of coming from totally different backgrounds and experiences. So something like we did today, while giving a visual explanation of what we look like, an audio description, which is used for folks who are blind or low vision. And as someone who, I have a background as well in theater, and constantly thinking about making things accessible, they often don't only make the event more successful and inclusive for folks who need that service, but it also generally makes the event more engaging and more accessible to everyone. So I would just love to hear from each of you there's different proven practices of what you all have seen of different ways to facilitate classrooms or setting up a room that gives the people who are attending the event, making them feel welcomed or setting up a brave space in order to do that. If we could go just in the same order, Mimosa, Margaret, and then Caitlyn, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So, making space for and including people of all backgrounds and abilities, it's fundamental to creating this sense of welcome, and especially in a digital space that can feel so isolating. Persons of color, as well as rural and underserved communities, are at most risk of disengagement due to lack of access to reliable internet and/or devices. And so it is doubly important that we work to identify and think about voices we're not hearing right now, working shoulder to shoulder with our community partners if possible. We're reaching out and listening to community organizers and observing and learning from their mutual aid efforts. Thinking about the fact that when we have events that are online, the people who are receiving and attending and engaging with us are also balancing a lot of responsibilities, whether it's caregiving, an inclement home space, malaise due to economic pressures. And we as well have to be flexible and accommodating. Now, some practical tips that I think about are things that I learned recently from the Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. They have a great site in which they offer a lot of resources on how to effectively address accessibility concerns, whether that's using visual descriptions of speakers and alt text on slides, to thinking a little more deeply about how to make closed captioning possible and make sure that that closed captioning is accessible and understandable before an event takes place. And also thinking about a rubric that invites library staff to inquire about registered participants' accessibility needs before an event. And finally, to think about like where your positionality is in relation to what you're presenting. So grounding yourself in your position and who you are in relation to what you're sharing is important, because we are never going to be experts of others' lived experiences. And so to be able to speak to that and to then make space for others to be part of that learning is really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you said, and I think there are these commonalities regardless of what type of library you're in or where your library is, and certainly access, I think, is such a critical part of that, and that's takes all forms. One principal one for us in our tiny little town in Vermont, which has not great broadband access across the state, it's a huge problem, is trying to make Wi-Fi and digital access available to as many people as we can. And we've been able to add a stronger Wi-Fi signal here at the library. We are also closing on Monday, but you can sit in your car, not great, but perhaps at least one option for downloading a employment application or a homework assignment or whatever it is that you might need. It's also a way for people to stay in touch with us. We've been fortunate enough to be able to help get a second Wi-Fi spot. As I mentioned, we're quite widespread on the other side of town. And that's really the woman who owns the general store where we got that set up has said that's been really a great resource for the people who live near where her store is. And then I think the access also goes out to inclusion, as you mentioned, and we're right now working on a resilience assessment in our town to get people's ideas of what our community is like and how resilient and inclusive we are. And I think it'll be really interesting for us to get that feedback. So one of the challenges has been, how do we make sure we hear everybody's voice? And, there are migrant farm workers in our town, so we've worked to get a Spanish version of the assessment available. We have people who are not literate, so we've made an oral version of it available as well. But the one thing I realize is the more that we think about this, the more I worry, who else are we leaving out? And I think that's one of the things I always have to keep thinking about is who might not have a chance to lend their voice, and how can we find a way to make them feel part of it, whether that's closed captioning or some other, as a library, we have the means to provide those options.
I think those are really great answers, and they share something that I also struggle with at work, and it's the idea, as Mimosa described it, the voices we're not hearing. Who is not in the room, whether the room is a physical space or a virtual space. And one of the things that me and my immediate colleagues have sort of been reminded, we knew, but it was refreshed in our minds, is once you take away the physical space, which for us is the main branch of a large public library, you lose the serendipitous moment of encounter of people who are at the library for hundreds of other reasons. They're getting their passport renewed, they're getting a headshot done, they're in their Arabic, literacy class, and then encounter the rare book department when they were never going to seek it out and, find something that speaks to them, which is really the kind of work that we thrive upon. When you make things virtual, that's not there. And so then who is our audience? Who are our users? And who do we want our users to be, and how to make that happen? And I think the answer is also something that Mimosa and Margaret mentioned, which is really being willing to cede your own authority and partner with community members in actual collaborative programming. So like the program I did, the talk I gave, was fine, but that's not community-centered programming. That is me doing a gallery talk. But community-centered programming is where you really share authority and amplify the voice of someone who might not be backed by a large or powerful institution, to allow a real spirit of collaboration. And I think that can exist in the virtual sphere just as it can in the physical. It just adds a bunch more logistical challenges, like what Margaret was so perceptively talking about with the digital divide. One of the things we're pursuing now in the Rare Book Department is podcasts, because at least that leads the opportunity to put it on the radio. The weird quirk about Philadelphia is our public access television is actually a cable station, which feels like it shouldn't be the case, but is. So it's always interesting how we can try to work to reach the audiences that we think make up the core of the work that we do, which for us is Philadelphians.
Yes, thank you all once again. It's so inspiring to be thinking about, humanities programming and libraries as these essential, vital places of community, and thinking about how to meet our community's needs requires a lot of thinking about who our community is, who are we not hearing, right? Or who is our community, and how have we reached people so far? Even going back to thinking about like our land acknowledgement, right? And approaching all of our thinking with an anti-oppressive mindset. So that can require looking at having an assessment. I love that you're doing a resilience assessment, Margaret. I think that's so great, because it's something that you can do an institutional assessment of where your library has been able to serve their community well, and thinking about of those people who we might not be hearing from, and how you can bring them into the room. And it's also exciting just to hear tidbits from you all about, regardless of the content, even if the content itself isn't necessarily like, this is anti-oppressive content, or this is content that is like inclusive towards everyone, there are strategies to approach it, either in facilitation, talking about the second gallery, different options. Like there's always ways that we can continue to explore how to have our content be inclusive and have our outreach practices match all of the wonderful content that we have to give to people. So thank you all again for doing that. I wanted to ask you all a last question before we open it up to the audience. So for folks who are tuning in, if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to type them in the chat, and then we'll be able to read them off. But while you're thinking about those questions, my last question that I have for our panelists today is what are some other proven practices for humanities programming? This can be even talking about like event logistics that are helpful. I know that you all gave examples of like things with virtual programming are increase like the difficulty of managing it. Are there any proven practices that you have tried out or that you've seen that have eased the creation of virtual events, especially ones that are about the humanities? I'm just curious to see what you all have seen. Why we start with Caitlyn and move on to Margaret and then Mimosa. See what you have to say.
Yeah, thank you, Bibi. I think it's a great logistical question. And I touched on it a bit in my last answer, but the thing that startled us the most was the marketing of things. We've never had to concern ourselves so much with selling ourselves because we've always sort of been there and people have found us. And also, you know, being with the Free Library of Philadelphia, we have a marketing team. It's just that now that we're all doing different things in, you know, 700 homes instead of 50 locations, the marketing team isn't marketing all of us. And so I think it's been a good reminder to maintain relationships, because those relationships are what are going to make your program successful and meaningful.
Yes, I agree. I think getting the word out is certainly something. I mean, I think that's part of what, as a public library, we are sort of used to. And as a small public library, we are the marketing department. So, you know, we're making our own flyers and all of that good stuff. But realizing that we had to find other ways to connect with people that, you know, maybe there are people who aren't online but still would be interested in having books set out for them on our library porch. So how do we make sure those people know about what we have to offer? As far as once we started doing some programming, some of the things that we found were helpful were to have some resources available to people ahead of time. So for instance, we did a 3-part series on the year 1936, and we sort of talked about different aspects of that year and why it was important. You know, we sort of touched on The Boys in the Boat, the book you may be all familiar with, about the rowing team from Seattle, Washington that went to the Olympics. But, you know, it spread out to how the Jewish population in Europe and America was being treated. And, you know, what about the other issues, the Great Depression and everything else? But we were able to provide a resource sheet ahead of time with some links, or if you didn't have access to a computer, you could pick up a copy here at the library. And that made people sort of feel engaged before they even came to the program. And so that was a really nice connection. And I think that helped us, sort of as the people who were putting on the discussion series, helped us feel like we were all ready to have that conversation. So that was really great. And the other thing that I think has been really helpful, kind of along those same lines, is supplying the supplies for anything that we might be offering to everybody. So we're, you know, it's like everybody is going to get the little thing of glue and all the cutouts and whatever they might need. So it's not making a distinction. We also had lunches here that people could pick up over the summer, and we weren't asking anybody to prove whether or not they needed a lunch. It was just have a lunch. So I think that we are lucky that we were able to do that. But I think it's important to make it available to all as much as you possibly can.
I echo the comments shared by Caitlyn and Margaret here, and recognizing the physical challenges of being able to support online programs is real, and recognizing that these online programs that once in person were discussions or experiential learning, which required materials and were workshops that were hands-on, and how do you translate that to an online format is certainly a barrier I know that a lot of folks are trying to wrap their heads around. What I do think are useful, or some tips and strategies that I would recommend include, so for example, if you're doing a discussion online and if you happen to have the capacity at your organization to have at least one person help with technical support while the other person is there to act as a facilitator and more effectively engage and interact with participants and learners, creating additional resources ahead of time that can assist with self-directed learning. So for example, if you have a handout and you want to share that during the event itself or leading up to the event on your website, is another way to prime people to think about what you're about to talk about or what the presenter will be sharing. In addition to things that might be like a video that's hosted on your library's YouTube channel about a how-to that you have done previously, or having a reading list shared out would be very helpful. And you could also share that information afterwards as well to continue the conversation. So giving people the option to determine how they want to pursue their learning, both self-directed as well as what would happen within the context of the event itself. Some other things that I think are really useful and valuable to maximize the most of what staff time is, as well as patron time. I suggest creating opportunities for fellow colleagues to sustain a community of practice. So learning how to develop and deliver online events is something we're all learning together, and finding ways to reflect on what's working and what isn't is really important. Making sure that we designate space in our scheduling to account for digital fatigue community members might be experiencing, and just be very mindful, like, well, what are we going to share when and how, and what could be useful in terms of the online engagement, so that you are maximizing, again, what you're doing within the space of the synchronous learning. Honoring ways for yourself and others to notice and occasionally even welcome silence. Pauses aren't an indication that a program is a failure, but rather that participants are thinking and understanding how to incorporate that information. And it could very well be a technical issue on their part because of the connectivity issues. I also want to champion developing engagement strategies that prioritize peer-to-peer learning and feedback. So thinking carefully about what will be live versus what is pre-recorded. What information can be shared for self-guided learning versus the kind of learning that can only happen through conversation and reflection together. And above all, supporting joy, laughter, feelings of normalcy during a turbulent time. So many of our community members are experiencing trauma, whether firsthand or secondary, and they're unsure of how to deal with a lot of conflicting emotions. And those opportunities present themselves when we prioritize creative expression and exploration. And then the last resource I want to share is the work of Autumn Brown and Maurice Mitchell Brody. They are facilitators who presented their own framework for anti-oppressive facilitation at the Allied Media Conference this past summer. And they shared about ways one could move towards and beyond conflict and just be mindful of the space and privilege that we all inhabit.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. It's been really wonderful talking with you all about this topic. And really, I can't think of the question that the humanities poses of what it means to be human. I can't imagine approaching that topic without thinking about how are we centering the humans who are in the room, who are creating the content, and how we can all connect together. So I really appreciate this conversation that we had today. And I want to bring it over to Mary, who's going to open it up for us, the conversation for questions from the audience.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Mimosa and Caitlyn and Margaret and BB. This was very rich. I want to encourage everyone to post their questions in the chat. And also, it's been fantastic. I think that some of you have been posting some of your experiences and what is happening in your community and your library with these as you're presenting virtual programs on the humanities, or as you are finding barriers to reaching people in your community that you want to and need to with your humanities programming in a virtual space. So please do post there, and in the meantime, I will ask. Pardon?
Oh, I was gonna say, I have a question in the can if you, unless you have one. You go
Nope.
ahead.
Go for it. Sure.
Great, because yes, going along with that, I saw in the comment that there's, a particular frustration with virtual programming because of the digital divide, and how we can reach folks who are coming again from different experiences. So I was kind of curious if there were any models. You mentioned, like, I think Margaret talking about being able to give folks like something physical, or having lunches that people could come and pick up, or having some passive non-contact ways to continue to give resources to people was a great suggestion. But are there any other proven practices, or maybe even mixed events of in-person or virtual? Just curious of the minds we have in the room if there's other strategies to help bridge that.
One thing I'd like to mention comes from a colleague of mine who's actually an art librarian. Her name's Alina Jasan. And she, at the Free Library of Philadelphia, developed and piloted a sidewalk computer cafe for our regular patrons who come by, predominantly for device usage, and staffed with donated laptops and the little bleed out of the Wi-Fi that came through the building, and really made a meaningful program that responded to real need in the community, mostly with our patrons who are houseless at the moment. And it was really, through word of mouth, became a very popular program. Now that it's winter, however, that's not an enduring solution, but it really did speak to and answer a real need in the summer and fall months. So I want to thank her for that on this program.
Margaret.
Oh, I would just echo that. I mean, I think it's tricky, libraries, we all are dealing with our own budget constraints, and sometimes then wanting to help people who have individual or family budget constraints. But, to the extent that we are able to make resources available, computers, we have a nice porch. We're in Vermont. No one's sitting on our porch right now. But again, in the summer, we had laptops available that people could check out. We quarantined and sanitized them as we needed to when they were returned. But I think it was just knowing that that was available was a very comforting thing for people. It's sort of a common thread when there was a lot of things that might be changing day to day.
I'd just like to ask if in your presentation of humanities programs, if your partners in the humanities, scholars you're working with or other institutions, if you have what the conversation has been with them as you've planned how to continue to present content. I know, Margaret, you mentioned, getting materials out there so that everyone's sort of on the same page in terms of starting, but are there any other insights in the ongoing conversations you may be having in those partnerships, and any of the illuminations you've had or challenges that you've experienced that you can share with the group that they can take back to their partnerships in the humanities?
I will say that recently our library participated with 10 other area libraries in a joined event where we invited scholar Ibram X. Kendi to talk about his book How to Be an Anti-Racist, and that was done in collaboration with suburban libraries in the Chicago area. And the event itself was a conversation. It was framed between Dr. Kendi and Natalie Moore, who is a reporter for our local WBEZ outlet, as well as an author herself of a book called The South Side. And she and him had this conversation in which they talked about some of the primary facets of his book, his central thesis, as well as its relevance in comparison to current events. And one of the takeaways that I have from that for humanities programming is just thinking about how we can amplify each other's work, recognizing that we're not operating in a vacuum, we're not limited to a singular geographical location necessarily, even though we obviously know a lot about our individual communities, and certainly at our library we have community tie-in events that specifically address and follow up on that group event. I think about how we can more effectively channel our efforts together so that we can continue to provide that information and support and not necessarily compete with one another's channels.
Thank you. Ooh, we do have a question that has come up about challenges from one of our participants. And this attendee says, I have two roadblocks, small budget and resistance to new program ideas. How can I sell admin on spending money on a new program instead of allocating the money to tried and true programs? Would anyone like to field that? Margaret, okay.
I'll start. I think that is a familiar experience. And I think when kind of going back to the whole notion of partnerships, that can really help if you find someone else in your community who is willing to work with you on this program and sort of support your idea. That can make it more attractive to your administration to taking on something that might be a little out of the mainstream for them. That has worked well for us in some of the humanities programming that we've done here.
One other thing that might be useful is no one is going to describe this pandemic really as an opportunity. It's not an opportunity, it's a crisis. It's a series of crises, but it does make space to say, well, our traditional programs aren't doable or aren't working. So now is a time to think about different ways that we can speak to our users and our partners. And that is something that when you're caught up in the day-to-day, go to the library, do this book club, do that, you might not be able to make enough space to justify. But in this point of sort of administrative vacuum from a national down to a very small level, that maybe you can build something, particularly if, as Margaret said, you do have partners to build it with you.
I think we have about 2 minutes left. And I'm not seeing any more questions. So I think I would like to invite any of you, if you have closing thoughts, to share them quickly, and then I will thank everyone and wrap this up.
I'll just say thanks for letting me participate and learn from Mimosa and Caitlyn, and Bibi. Thanks so much for your facilitation and guidance as we had this really meaningful conversation.
I just want to say my thanks as well to both Margaret and Caitlyn for offering their experiences with their respective libraries, and to Bibi for her thoughtful facilitation. And I also just want to add too that with humanities programming, it's really about helping each other feel seen and heard. And it's especially compelling for me as someone who sometimes struggles with that herself and wonders how to bring her most authentic self to places. And I think that with regards to library programs in a time of immense crisis, this is what we can do best, is help people feel seen and heard.
How beautifully said. What a wonderful note to end on. So a huge thank you to everyone for attending this today. I know there are many resources that were mentioned that we'll be able to send out, I believe, in a post email. And please do be sure also to complete your evaluation after this that you will receive. And just a tremendous thank you to Mimosa and Caitlyn and Margaret and Bibi for this excellent discussion. And this presentation has been offered as part of the Programming Librarians free online learning with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities CARES grants. The archived version of this session will be available to view on programminglibrarian.org. It will be there within 48 hours. And Caitlyn, do you have anything to add to send us off today?
I actually had thought Mimosa had come to such a wonderful summary point that I wanted to end it on that.
Yeah.
But thank you for making more space for me.
Understood.
And thank you to everyone who joined us today. And thank you especially to Bibi and their hard work bringing us all together.
Thank you all.
Yes, thanks everybody.